Tech marketing is the Dr. Evil of the tech space. Well, the first thing is that it's just easier to swim downstream than it is to swim upstream. So as soon as something gets popularized, everybody coagulates around it. Everybody has to coagulate. Probably not even the right word, but this is where my brain is at with this right now. And I'll tell you why. I'll explain why. Was just about to record a note about DaaS. And what the heck is DaaS? Well, it's something as a service. And so now that SaaS has become really popular, everything has to be something as a service. Even if it makes absolutely no sense to call it as a service or, it has another name. Everything has been rebranded into this something as a service. So we no longer talk about it in terms of like hosted PBX or VoIP systems or these sorts of platforms. It has to be unified communications as a service. And it's not contact center. It's contact center as a service or CCaaS. And now, people are trying to brand the SecAS, security as a service, or, DR as a service, or backup as a service, or desktop as a service, or this as a service, or blah, blah, blah as a service. And it reminds me really of two things. It reminds me of late 90s when the .coms were going like crazy. We had the first iteration, everything was something.com. And then when everything was becoming registered, then it had, then there was a new trend that was started. And the trend became something.com, right? And some of these still survive to this day, like eHarmony. Why is it called eHarmony? Because it was just popular to name your startup something with an E in front of it. So eHarmony.com became a thing. And then after the E ran out, then it became an I something. iWin was a big one of these things. But, the part that really affected me from a architecture engineering standpoint was clustering. And even to today, clustering is this really kind of nebulous term. Now, not many companies are dealing with clustering anymore because they just don't think about it. They run like RDS or Aurora and AWS. And they don't think about what's going on with their database servers anymore. We would go through and have to deal with, vendor evaluation and selections. And everybody was selling you clustering for your database server, but they weren't really defining what they were doing clustering-wise. And we had True 64 clusters, which were these really cool quasi-single instance clusters where the system had nodes and CPUs and RAM and memory and an interlink between them, but you could reboot individual nodes within the cluster, or you could, as they booted up, you could run processes on different ones dynamically. And you had this really, probably the truest sense of what a real cluster was in terms of like what people thought it was, of like one box that you could just dynamically make bigger and bigger and bigger. Well, to a point. Back then is when we had Beowulf just hit the market, and Beowulf clusters. It was kind of this idea of like a single, it wasn't a single system image. What I mean, like single operating system running across multiple different nodes, interconnect with each other. It was more of an approach of like distributed work and distributed job scheduling. You would say, okay, I need to, process this, and you could break those units of work down into smaller pieces and distribute it against the cluster. Most popular form of clustering at the time was Veritas VCS when it came to databases. And when I say most popular, I mean, it was like this just became a part of the accepted stack. You ran Oracle, you probably ran VCS, and you were running on Sun Solaris. And what VCS was, it was a failover cluster. And, there was, within Oracle, you had, different components of building blocks that you needed in order for the database to actually run, right? So you'd have to make sure the storage was mounted. It was connected to the storage. Then you would start the actual database process, mount, what's the word I'm looking for here to share? You would actually start or, have an IP address that was shared between them. So you would, connect that to the host, and then you would start the Oracle listener so clients could connect to it. And so, so you had this like built, these blocks, right? And so VCS could monitor each one of those blocks. And if something happened, or the heartbeat was no longer working anymore, it would fail over to the second node, and the second node could go through the whole thing and start in theory, it would start everything up on the second server. The reality was, if you actually had a catastrophic failure on the primary server, it never started cleanly on the secondary server because you had to figure out how to recover what the catastrophic failure was in the primary in order for the secondary to start. But it did a lot of things for you, and it was automated. And the executive teams felt fantastic because now we had a cluster, and we could advertise, and answer all these nonsensical survey questions from partners of like, yes, we had a cluster, we had a database cluster, we have everything's redundant. But so when clustering got hot, at that period of time, everybody that was related to anything doing in the database world was trying to figure out how to shoehorn their system into saying that, are we a cluster? Bob, are we a cluster? Yeah. Can we? Yes, you're a cluster. Oh, wait. Yeah. We're a cluster. Tell everybody we're a cluster. Marketing teams, go forth. Sales teams, go forth. Tell everybody we're clusters. So now it's, what are the popular ones? So everything got branded as something as a service. SD-WAN, everything's been branded SD-WAN, whether it's SD-WAN or not. I mean, what does SD-WAN actually do? Nobody really knows anymore because everything is SD-WAN. That's happening with SASE. The funny thing about SASE is the definition of what SASE actually is, and everybody claiming they have a SASE solution. Nobody actually meets the definition of SASE by, so like in its complete, like what it has to include format. So like nothing's actually SASE, but everybody's marketing SASE and everybody wants to buy SASE because that's what they think they need. I mean, the same nonsense is going on in the security space right now. Everything in security has to be something detection and response. So it was MDR, then became MTDR, then it was EDR. Now everybody's like XDR. What the heck is XDR? Like it's just marketing. None of these things have real definitions. Part of our onboarding for analysts, for pricing analysts here, we have this. For lack of a better word, we have a dictionary where we try to explain commonalities of terms that are actually the same term, just expressed different ways. So simplistic example of that would be internet. We need a internet access circuit. Somebody needs a connection to the internet from an office, from a location. So then we have to define what are broadband circuits, what are dedicated circuits, what is FIOS. Well, FIOS it used to be a fiber optic designation. Now it's really just a marketing term for broadband. Or UVerse did the same thing. Or a lot of carriers call it dedicated internet access for dedicated fiber, but then some wanted to call it fiber internet access, and some wanted to call it, AIA, and it's like everybody, it's like everything becomes these terminologies. And then at some point you get a standards body, and the standard body comes in and then creates its own definitions. And then the standards body says it's not really internet access or DIA or FIA or AIA, it's really called E-access. And then it defines E-line and E-LAN, but then when you're like E-line versus E-LAN, you're like, well, is that MPLS or VPLS or, layer 2 transport or wave or alien wave or dark fiber? I mean, and it's really no wonder why this, like the buying process for this stuff has gotten so insanely complicated, because you can never really figure out what you're buying. I've been doing this for 25 years. So, the advantage I have is just I've been doing this for so long. I've been buying IT and deploying and building into infrastructure for so long now that, I've been through these pain cycles enough. But, if you tagged somebody, if you were going to do this yourself, or if you have somebody on your team and you're like, go out and get us XYZ tech, like you're sending the lamb to slaughter. I mean, they have no shot of actually figuring out the difference between one or the other. I mean, trying to understand, like, what do we actually need for a phone system, and what is our SD-WAN solution to prevent NAT traverse, NAT gateway transitions. So, and that's why I say, for me, the Dr. Evil and all of this is just what marketing does to this industry. And I understand it. I get it. I get why it happens. I know why it happens. It happens because you've got a product that you have to take to market, that you have to get traction for, that you need to figure out how to get inbound on, that you need to get, revenue attached to, that you need to show your MQLs on. And it's infinitely easier to become, the tech version of Uber for X. You're like, of course, we do X, Y, and Z that everybody's out there looking at and talking about, the analysts are interested in, and our customers are already shopping, because it is the path of least resistance. It is swimming downstream. It just in the process has made things just so unnecessarily confusing, and it's unfortunate. It's just unfortunate. So read the fine print. Ask the questions. If somebody tells you there's something, ask. Just be like, oh, what does that mean? Explain it to me. Why? What this? What does that compare to? I hate comparison-based evaluations of like, this versus that. But sometimes it's helpful to say, okay, you do X and this other vendor does X, and what's the difference between you and them? And if they can't, there might be some cases where they can't actually answer that question, and there's other cases where they can. I started off with DAS, desktop as a service. Okay, well, desktop as a service really came out of this idea of virtual desktop or VDI or terminal services, right? Okay, great. More terminology. When you start talking about a DAS solution, the next thing you start talking about is, are you doing dedicated desktops or virtualized desktops within that DAS solution? Or are you doing, an active host server? Or, like, how are you laying out and how these desktops are they one-to-one resources? Does it look like an EC2 farm? Does it not? Like yada, yada, yada. And there's really two major platforms for this. It's VMware and Citrix. And there's some of it that functions very similarly, and there's some of it that functions radically different. And And if you're talking to a company and one company is VMware based, just ask them why. Now the answer, of course, is some of it that's technology and some of it's going to be partnerships. I mean, that's the other dirty secret and lie about this industry is when you find service providers partnering and or acquiring, it's they're doing it to plug holes in their service offering, like back to the SASE solution. In order to be SASE, we have to be these things. So okay, we're not this thing here, so let's go out and get a partnership with that thing. Some companies over the years have done a really good job of going out and finding the best and the strongest partner to fill that hole. A lot of times it's just who gives them the best deal as a reseller or a partnership has the best partner program. Like maybe the top 5 vendors in the space don't have partner programs they want to mess with because either they're too small, they can't afford it, they can't make the commitments to it, they're already partnered with other people, they want to find something that's differentiated, and so they end up with company 6, with logo 6, and maybe logo 6 isn't what you want to deal with, but now it's a SASE solution, so you don't know any different, right? So back to this VMware thing. VMware has vSphere, which is it's a fantastic and very common virtualization platform for enterprises, and then VMware took vSphere and turned it into vCloud. And when you look at a lot of the private cloud infrastructure as a service IaaS companies, when you ask them what's underneath the hood, you're going to find out that it's vCloud. And this isn't bad, but I make that point because if you're dealing with a smaller shop that's running vCloud, a lot of their cost goes into just licensing for vCloud. And what you're paying for in that situation is you're paying for their volume and their scale with VMware and where they actually sit within the vCloud licensing tier. And then you go to the next step, right? Well, so instead of running vCloud, what could you run? Well, you could run Proxmox, or you could run OnApp, or you could run, what else would be popular there? It doesn't even actually matter. Let's just say Proxmox and OnApp being the most common. CloudStack was there, right? You could run OpenStack. My brain completely turned off on that one there for a moment. And I'm not saying that these are good or bad platforms. I'm just saying that there were decisions that went beyond the technical selection process of why these platforms were picked. And a lot of times it's financial. But then again, you get back to the same situation, which is, we have this fill-in-the-blank technology or fill-in-the-blank infrastructure, or fill-in-the-blank whatever it is. And, and is it what you want or is it what you know? Is it not? It's such a mess. Anyways, ask questions, dig underneath the hood, compare 2 vendors, compare 3 vendors, talk to an expert, somebody who's done this before, done this a few times, does this a few dozen times, does this a few dozen times a year, these sorts of things. And you might be surprised. You might be surprised because what you think you need is not what you actually need, and what you actually need is something you never considered. And these sorts of tweaks can make, huge differences in your business and creating, leverage and value for your business. So just remember, tech marketing, Dr. Evil, and be really careful and just pay attention and dig in and dig a little deeper as you're going out and buying these things. I'm Max Clark. It's 20 minutes max. A little bit more of a rant than usual this morning, but hope it helps. See ya.